So a viewer from Appleton, wants the panel to discuss the status of the Appleton prison. We haven't discussed this for a couple of weeks. It's been a regular much of the year, and of course, in my 25 plus years here, the Appleton prison seems to pop up occasionally. So let's start with you, Representative Swedzinski. What do we hear about the Appleton prison in terms of any legislation that might actually pass?
Well, I think the basis of what's going on is they're still working. I think Senator Lang and Representative Miller have really pushed it. That's obviously a big part of their district, and Senator Ames and I are kind of on the southern side of that region. And I think what they're really looking at is essentially a potentially rent to own, or the big issue with that is getting folks to engage in the idea that that's a good place to just house inmates. The governor has said that we simply need to change our policies when it comes to incarceration, and that will solve the issue by itself, and we don't necessarily need to add beds. I would argue that that may or may not happen, but in reality, rather than build a new facility in the metro, if that's going to happen, I think we should really very seriously look at it as far as updates. I think that's it's going to be a key part of a bill that moves forward, that if something happens, and set dollars aside and the rest. And it's an important part for our region, being from Southwest Minnesota when it comes to jobs and creation. It's a rock solid facility. I think it has 1,600 beds, and for the viewers across the state, I think it's been shut down for a number of years, but it's a maintained building. It's essentially ready to go. I don't think there's food in the freezer, but I think the toilet's flush. So.
Representative Hanson,
I haven't been tracking that conference committee. I don't know. Is it in the conference committee report? Is it still in there? Or do you know, Senator?
Yeah. So what's in the current proposal is that if the Department of Corrections wants to add another bed, if they need to add more space in somewhere before they do that, we need to get an appraisal of the Appleton prison. Listen, last year when I was in the House, that was what I recommended. Let's actually get an appraisal. Mm-hmm. The Corrections Corporation of America, which is a private company, and I am adamantly opposed to private companies putting people in our prisons. I just don't believe in it, and I think it's fundamentally wrong. And I'm a police officer. I just think that that's one of those core functions of government that we should do. People should not profit off of when we take someone's civil rights away. And that means that those people maybe earn their civil rights being limited, but we shouldn't profit off of it. What we did in the House last year, they ran through a bill that said you will buy the Appleton prison. We didn't even get an appraisal. We didn't have a budget on it. We didn't have a number. They're paying tax value of like $12 or $14 million on the property taxes out there.
I think it's about $1 million a year.
Yeah, and they want 16, or they want to sell it for $60 to $90 million. So have the people of Appleton and Swift County been getting the shaft over this, meaning that Corrections Corporation of America argued that their taxable value was this low? And this is why I said originally, well, let's actually get an actual appraisal for it. Because if we don't buy it, then they still need to be paying the actual property tax to the citizens of Swift County on this. That's what's the right thing to do. Listen, Corrections Corporation of America could be open tomorrow if they decided they wanted to put prisoners in there. I was out there on a tour with everybody last year or the year before, and they said, we had the best workforce in the world out here. And I said, then why did you leave? That was up to you. That was their decision. It wasn't Minnesota that said they had to leave. But I will say this, if we end up buying the prison, or we end up getting into that spot ever someday, then we need to make sure that we also say that there will be no more private prisons in Minnesota. That's a number one issue for me. But there's other things that we've tried to work with Appleton. I know the governor's staff has worked with DEED, Department of Economic and Employee Development, on grants, what we can do in the area. Where it's at, bottom line, in the infrastructure of our Department of Corrections infrastructure, it is a difficult location, but nothing's undoable. We can figure it out, and I understand. I grew up out in that area, family farms in Swift County, and I understand the concept of needing the jobs. And if you actually had 1,600 prisoners out there, that's a lot of people. But they had to bust people in. And I know the mayor of Appleton and the county out there would rather the state actually just owns it, if that's the way it ends up being, because they don't want it to be abandoned. Because if we don't own it, because that's going to be, like I said in committee last year, are you prepared that when we don't need the beds anymore, that we're going to shut it down? Because that's what's going to happen. That'll be the first place shut down if we don't own it. So I mean, that's what that has. Those serious questions have to be asked. to the citizens of Appleton. And I understand, believe me, I understand. If I had, they were at a 9% unemployment rate in that area. I mean, people want the jobs. I get it, but we do have to be responsible with the taxpayers' money.
Senator Deems?
Absolutely have to be, responsible taxpayers' money. I think one thing we could look at, and some of the issues that I hear, like you said, is the ownership of the property. That's a real concern. Another one is the management of the prison. That's certainly a concern. And another one is, would it be a unionized prison or not? That's certainly a prison. That's certainly a concern. But I think that those questions can be answered. And, we talk about, should the state own it? If the state owns it, like you said, it's going to be $12, $13 million of property tax valuation that's gone unless the state pays that. We also could look at doing a long-term lease. And if we did a long-term lease, and it was a net lease to where the state managed everything other than paid once a year, whatever, to lease it, and the corporation paid the tax, the property tax, so we could keep the county whole, we could have the state whole because we could get the same accomplished leasing by owning it, and we could also make sure that it is totally and fully managed by the state, the people that manage our state prisons now, versus an outside private management corporation. So I think that there's some solutions there that could work. One of the things I hear a lot is that there's hesitation to build or buy a prison because of the change in the structure of the penal codes and how they feel that'll kick in over a period of a few years. And if that truly is the case, then if we lease this, we probably wouldn't even have to lease the whole facility if we didn't want to. I mean, I think there's some arrangements that could be made there that could make this attractive, could make this work, but yet could solve the problems of who manages it, who takes care of it, and basically who owns it through a lease. I think those things could be done. I just think we have to take a look at what's sitting there. It would probably be one of the most updated prisons we have if that was opened back up and the state of Minnesota would use it. As far as closing, I think there was a lot more things than what we probably talk about that went into that. We got to keep in mind that there was prisoners from all over the United States in that prison. And so I don't know all the bottom line details, but it wasn't, certainly Minnesota didn't close it, but Minnesota probably didn't have a lot of prisoners in it either, so I'm not just sure how that fits into it. But I think what we have to do, instead of looking back, look forward and see what options we have to make this work, keeping the county whole tax-wise and making this a very feasible option for the state.